The morning sun had just begun to rise over New Delhi, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors, as if the whole city was waking up with a gentle smile. Sundar Pichai stepped out of the black car slowly, his eyes scanning the silent streets that would soon be crowded with people rushing to work, honking cars, and chai stalls filling the air with the sweet smell of boiling tea leaves and spices. Sundar adjusted his simple dark suit, feeling the weight of something deeper inside his chest. It wasn't just another visit. This time, he was here for something he couldn't even explain to himself yet. He had flown in without any official announcement, no cameras flashing, no reporters chasing him. He wanted to feel the heartbeat of the city in its rawest form, to breathe the same air as the millions who looked up to him silently, as he walked toward the small, unmarked entrance of a government guest house. Sundar's mind kept replaying a single memory from his childhood in Chennai. He remembered standing with his father near an old railway station, waiting for a late-night train that never came on time. His father wore an old watch, a watch that had a tiny crack on its glass. It was not expensive or fancy, but his father would look at it with such pride, telling Sundar that time was more valuable than money. The same words echoed in his heart now, each step in Delhi making them louder. Sundar thought about how far he had come, but he never forgot that cracked watch, or the humble lessons it taught him. Inside the guest house, the room was simple. White walls with no paintings, a wooden table with a small steel jug of water, and an old ceiling fan that squeaked every few seconds. Sundar sat down, alone, and closed his eyes. He remembered his mother's gentle voice, her hands mixing rice, and sambar on a steel plate, feeding him stories of kindness and respect. He felt a sharp ache in his chest, a longing for that simple life. He had built empires, spoken to presidents and kings, but he missed that small kitchen more than anything. The thought of humility wrapped around him like a warm blanket, making him feel human again. Just then, the door creaked open softly. Prime Minister Modi ji entered, wearing a plain white kurta and a simple shawl draped over his shoulders. His face carried the deep lines of countless responsibilities, yet his eyes still held a spark of warmth and curiosity. Sundar stood up quickly, folding his hands in respect. Modi ji nodded, a gentle smile forming as if he was seeing an old friend, rather than one of the world's most powerful tech leaders. They sat down facing each other, and for a moment there was only silence. A rare silence in a city that never sleeps. As they spoke, Sundar noticed something that took him back years and years. On Modi ji's wrist, he saw an old watch. Its leather strap was cracked at the edges, the glass slightly scratched, but it shone with a quiet dignity. Sundar couldn't take his eyes off it. It reminded him of his father's watch, the same symbol of respect for time and life's small, honest struggles. While Modi ji talked about the future of technology, digital India, and dreams of empowering villages, Sundar kept glancing at that watch. It wasn't a Rolex, not a shiny smartwatch. It was old, maybe even older than Sundar himself. He felt goosebumps rise on his skin, as if the universe had sent him a silent message. Suddenly, Sundar interrupted softly, "Sir, that watch." "May I ask where it came from?" Modi ji paused, looking down at his wrist. He smiled, a smile filled with hidden stories and silent sacrifices. He said, "This watch belonged to my father. He gave it to me when I left home as a young man. It reminded me to stay grounded and to respect every second I was given." His voice trembled slightly, a crack breaking through the strong image he always showed to the world. Sundar felt a tear forming in his eye. He knew this wasn't just a watch. It was a living piece of history, a symbol of simplicity and courage that connected to very different men in a powerful way. The room felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were listening closely. Sundar thought about the millions of young minds in India, those who looked at glossy billboards and believed that success meant big cars, tall buildings, and luxury watches. But here he was, sitting across from the leader of the nation, and they were both holding on to memories of old watches that once ticked quietly in the corners of small, humble homes. He realized that sometimes it was not about running faster, but about understanding where you started and why you started. Sundar leaned forward, his voice low but strong. "Sir, I came here today because I wanted to discuss something beyond technology. I wanted to understand the soul of India again, this watch. It tells me more than any policy or business plan ever could. Modiji's eyes softened even more, and he reached across the table, placing his hand gently over Sundar's. In that single touch, there was no politics, no corporate agenda, only two sons remembering the sacrifices of their fathers. Two men carrying the same silent promise to make every second count for the next generation. As they sat together, the old ceiling fan kept squeaking above them, and outside, the city slowly started to roar back to life. Cars honked, birds sang, people called each other from the street corners. But inside that small room, time had almost stopped. Sundar felt an idea growing in his mind. Something bigger than any tech initiative, something that would echo across every village and city. Something that could touch every child dreaming under a broken roof. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew it was coming. And it all started with that old watch. The Prime Minister looked at Sundar and said, "You have always understood the power of small things, Sundar. This country needs people like you, people who remember their roots even when they touch the sky." Sundar nodded, feeling a strange mix of sadness and hope bubbling inside him. He thought of his father again, of those long walks to the bus stop, of the hot afternoons spent studying under a ceiling fan just like this one. He felt as if his entire life had been leading him to this exact moment. In the final moments of their meeting, Sundar stood up and bowed deeply, promising silently to himself that he would do something that honored not only his own father, but every father and mother across India, who wore cracked watches and sacrificed their dreams so their children could fly. As he walked out of the room, he looked back one last time at Modi Ji, who raised his wrist slightly, as if blessing Sundar's journey forward. Sundar stepped into the bright sunlight, feeling the warmth on his face, and for the first time in years, he felt like that small boy from Chennai again, the boy who believed that time was sacred, that even the smallest second could carry a universe of meaning. He took a deep breath, his mind already spinning with an idea that could change everything. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be obstacles and critics. But he felt an unshakable strength rising inside him, and as he got into his car, Sundar couldn't help but look at his own wrist, empty and bare. He smiled softly, thinking about what kind of watch he would wear from now on. Maybe he thought he didn't need a watch at all to remember what really mattered, but just as the driver started the engine, Sundar's phone buzzed violently. He looked at the screen, and his face turned pale. It was a message that would change everything he had planned. Something that could either destroy his dream before it even began, or push him into a journey that no one, not even he, was prepared for. He looked up at the rising sun, eyes burning with a mix of fear and determination. This was only the beginning. As the car moved slowly through the early morning traffic, Sundar kept staring at the message on his phone. It felt as if the words were vibrating into his bones, shaking him from the inside. The message was from an old friend in Chennai, someone. Sundar had grown up with someone who had once shared a single plate of rice with him when they had no money. Oh, the message was simple, but every letter felt like a hammer against his chest. It read, "Sundar, the children in our old neighborhood are being forced out of their school. They say the land will be used for a new shopping complex. Please help. They look up to you." Sundar's hands trembled slightly as he lowered the phone to his lap. The weight of those words pressed down on him, deeper than any boardroom crisis or corporate challenge he had ever faced. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the seat. Suddenly he was no longer the CEO of one of the world's biggest companies. He was a young boy again, barefoot on the hot Chennai roads, running toward that small school building with a torn bag slung over his shoulder. He could still remember the smell of chalk dust, the laughter of his friends echoing in narrow lanes, and the warm smile of their teacher who would share her own lunch with them when they forgot to bring theirs. That school was not just a building, it was a home, a dream, a small piece of hope that gave them a chance to see beyond the walls of poverty. Sundar felt a deep anger rise inside him, something he had rarely allowed himself to feel in all these years of polished meetings and quiet boardroom diplomacy. He opened his eyes, breathing deeply. He knew he couldn't turn away from this. The memory of Modi Ji's watch, that powerful symbol of time and sacrifice, still echoed inside him. He understood now that his visit to Delhi was not just to discuss digital strategies or policy alignments. It was a call, a silent push from the universe, asking him to act, to step beyond the comfortable boundaries he had built around himself. As the car pulled into the courtyard of the guest house again, Sundar stepped out quickly, almost running inside. His assistants tried to catch up, calling his name, but he didn't stop. He rushed back into the room where he had met Modi Ji just an hour ago. To his surprise, Modi Ji was still there, sitting alone, lost in thought, as if he too was carrying the heavy stories of millions on his shoulders. Sundar entered without knocking, his eyes burning with urgency. Modi Ji looked up, his expression surprised but calm. Like a teacher waiting patiently for a student to speak, Sundar didn't waste a second. He stepped forward and said in a low, firm voice, "Sir, I need your help. There is a school in Chennai in my old neighborhood. They are being forced to leave. That place made me who I am. If we lose it, we lose more than just walls and classrooms. We lose hope for every child who dares to dream beyond the boundaries they are born into." His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, he looked almost fragile, like that young boy. Once more, Modi Ji listened silently, his eyes softening with every word. He nodded slowly, placing his hand over the old watch again as if drawing strength from it. After a long silence, Modi Ji finally spoke, his voice deep and steady. "Sundar, you have given so much to the world with your innovations. Today, you are about to give something far more precious, a chance for children to hold on to their dreams. I will help you. But this is not just your fight or mine. It is a fight for every silent voice in every corner of India." Sundar felt a sudden wave of relief and warmth wash over him, but beneath it, a sharper feeling began to grow, the realization that the battle was only beginning. They spent the next 2 hours huddled over a small wooden table, the old ceiling. Fans still squeaking above them? Papers were spread out everywhere, maps of the neighborhood, lists of the students, documents about the land dispute. Modi Ji's advisors kept knocking on the door, reminding him of his next meetings, but he waved them away each time, focusing entirely on Sundar's words. There was an unspoken understanding between the two men, a deep respect that stretched beyond titles and positions. They were no longer just a prime minister and a CEO. They were two sons of India fighting for its children. Sundar shared stories. Of each child he remembered, of their bright eyes and fragile hopes, of how even a small scholarship had once felt like a miracle. He described the way the chalk dust would settle on their hair, making them look like tiny scholars from another world. Modi Ji listened carefully, sometimes nodding, sometimes closing his eyes as if he could see those dusty classrooms himself. Every detail felt like a stitch sewing them closer to a shared mission. As the sun rose higher, the room grew hotter, but neither of them noticed. They were lost in a quiet fire, a passion that burned brighter than any summer heat. Finally, Modi Ji stood up and placed a gentle hand on Sundar's shoulder. "I will visit the school with you. We will show them that no child's dream can be sold off for money. Let us go tomorrow." Sundar looked at him, eyes wide with shock and gratitude. He had not expected the leader of the country to personally walk into that small, forgotten neighborhood. It felt like a dream, a moment too good to be true. Outside the window, a flock of birds flew across the sky, their wings catching the sunlight like tiny flashes of silver. Sundar watched them, thinking of the children who deserved to fly just like that, free, fearless, and proud. He knew that tomorrow would be more than a visit. It would be a statement to the entire nation, a declaration that true power lay, not in towers of glass and steel, but in classrooms filled with chalk and laughter. After finalizing the plan, Sundar returned to his room late in the afternoon. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his empty wrist again. In his mind, he heard his father's voice, gentle but firm, telling him to use time wisely, to use every moment as a chance to lift someone else higher. He felt tears slip down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall freely, washing away the dust of all the years he had spent chasing endless meetings and board approvals. That night, Sundar could not sleep. He kept pacing the room, his mind spinning. With memories and worries, he thought about how the media might twist the story, how powerful people might try to stop them. He imagined the faces of the children, their hands gripping pencils with more power than any sword. He knew they deserved more than empty promises. They needed action. He decided to write a personal letter to the children, one they could read. Before he arrived, he wanted them to feel his presence even before seeing him in person. He took a simple notebook from the table and began to write slowly, his handwriting a little shaky at first. He wrote about his own childhood, about the struggles and the small joys that kept him going. He wrote about how each of them had the power to shape the future. They were not just students but dreamers, warriors of light in a world that often felt dark. He told them to hold on, to believe that help was coming and that no one could steal their right to learn and grow. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and kept it close to his heart. Just before dawn, Sundar finally lay down, closing his eyes for a few minutes of restless sleep. In his dreams, he saw the old watch on Modi Ji's wrist, its hands ticking softly, counting down to something he couldn't fully understand yet. He saw the children running through the dusty playground, their laughter echoing across empty streets, breaking through walls of silence and fear. He saw his own younger self standing among them, smiling brightly, free from all the burdens of adulthood. As the first light of morning touched his face, Sundar opened his eyes slowly. Today was the day. Today they would go back to where it all began. Today, they would remind the world that even the smallest classroom can hold 1,000 revolutions in every child's heart. He stood up, washed his face, and looked in the mirror. For a moment, he didn't see the powerful CEO. He saw a simple boy who still believed in miracles, who still carried the cracked watch of his father in his spirit, just as he was about to leave the room. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from one of his senior advisors. It read, "Sir, there is heavy resistance from local developers. They're threatening legal action and protests. It might become dangerous for you and Modi Ji." Sundar paused, reading the message over and over. A cold shiver ran down his spine, but then, slowly, he felt warmth spread across his chest. He remembered the promise he made to himself, to his father, to the children. He put the phone down, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The sky was alive with golden light, the city already humming with energy. Somewhere, far away, he imagined the children getting ready for school, tying their shoelaces, packing their small bags, not knowing that today their world would shift forever. Sundar knew that no matter what waited for them, he had to keep moving forward. He had to become the voice for those who had none. And as he stepped into the waiting car beside Modi Ji, who was already waiting with a calm but determined face, Sundar felt the entire weight of the moment fall upon him. They shared a quick look, a silent agreement that no threat, no wall, no amount of money could stop them from protecting those dreams. They nodded, and the car started moving, rolling toward a destiny that would not just change a few lives, but perhaps the soul of India itself. Little did they know, just beyond the next turn, a bigger storm was waiting, one that would test not just their strength, but the very spirit of the country. The car rolled quietly through the narrow streets of Chennai, the early morning sun casting long shadows of the bicycles and handcarts parked along the side. As they moved deeper into the old neighborhood, Sundar watched from the window, his heart swelling with bittersweet memories. Every shop, every crumbling wall, every narrow alley seemed to whisper stories from his childhood. The smell of fresh ideal, steaming in large aluminum pots. The echo of a street vendor calling out for fresh flowers, and the sharp cry of a young boy chasing a plastic ball through the dust. It all felt like a warm, painful embrace from the past he thought he had left behind. Beside him, Modi Ji sat in silence, his eyes steady and observant, as if trying to absorb every corner of the city into his soul. They passed a small tea stall, where an old man stirred a bubbling pot of chai. Sundar recognized him instantly. He was the same vendor who used to give him extra sugar in his tea when he was a teenager, struggling to stay awake after late-night study sessions. Sundar smiled softly, pressing his hand against the window. The man looked up, his eyes squinting against the glare of the morning sun, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, a silent greeting that carried the weight of years and countless silent kindnesses. Sundar wanted to stop the car right then, step out and embrace the old man. Memories. It was about something much bigger. The car finally stopped in front of the school. Sundar stepped out first, followed closely by Modi Ji, who adjusted his simple shawl and looked around with quiet intensity. The school building stood fragile but proud, its walls covered in peeling blue paint, and the gate hanging slightly off its hinges. A few curious children peeped from the dusty playground, their eyes wide with confusion and wonder. Teachers gathered. At the entrance, their faces drawn with worry and fatigue. They had been fighting to protect this place for weeks, but their voices had been drowned out by the roar of money and power as Sundar walked toward them.
One small girl stepped forward timidly.
Her hair was tied in two uneven braids, and her uniform was patched at the elbows. She clutched a thin notebook against her chest, as if it was a shield. Sundar bent down to her level and asked gently, "What is your name?" She looked up at him, her dark eyes shining with both fear and hope, and whispered, "My name is Anjali." He smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. "Anjali, do you like coming to this school?" She nodded fiercely, her small chin quivering as tears threatened to spill. "This is my favorite place. I want to be a scientist and make medicine for my mother." Sundar felt something break inside him at that moment, a powerful rush of love and sorrow that made his hands tremble slightly. He stood up slowly, turning to the teachers who now stepped forward, their voices trembling as they tried to explain. They spoke of court orders, bulldozers waiting nearby, and the developers who had already marked the land for a luxury shopping mall and apartment complex. They shared how they had spent sleepless nights planning ways to protect the children, hiding lesson materials and comforting parents who feared for their children's future. Sundar listened to every word, his eyes fixed firmly on their faces. Each story felt like a dagger cutting deeper into his heart, fueling an anger and determination that burned hotter with every breath. Modi Ji stepped forward then, his hand resting lightly on Sundar's shoulder. He looked at the teachers, the children, the gathered parents who had begun to arrive after hearing about the visit. His voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the murmurs around them. "We are here because this school is more than bricks and mortar," he began. "It is a garden of dreams, a place where the seeds of India's future are planted and nurtured. If we allow this garden to be destroyed, we are tearing out the roots of our nation's soul." His words echoed across the small courtyard, wrapping around each person like a protective shield. Sundar felt the tension in the air shift, the despair melting into a thin, fragile thread of hope. Just then, a loud engine roared in the distance. A line of black jeeps and a large yellow bulldozer appeared at the end of the street, kicking up clouds of dust as they advanced. Men in dark uniforms stepped out, some holding batons, others shouting into walkie-talkies. Behind them, a tall man in a crisp gray suit emerged, his face smug and cold. He was the lead developer, the one who had pushed the court orders through. Using money and connections to silence local resistance, he walked forward, his polished shoes leaving clean marks in the dust, and stood in front of Sundar and Modi Ji. With a thin smile, he spoke loudly so everyone could hear. "You have no right to stop this project. The land has been sold legally. These children will find other schools. Progress cannot be stopped by emotions and old memories." The words hung heavy in the air, cruel and sharp like broken glass. Sundar felt a deep rage boil in his veins. He took a step forward, his voice steady, but filled with quiet fire. "Progress does not mean destroying the future of our children. It does not mean silencing their laughter and replacing it with concrete. And glass?" The developer sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "You are a tech man, not a social worker. Stay out of this." Before Sundar could respond, Modi Ji stepped forward, raising his wrist and showing the old watch to the crowd. Through the noise like a blade, This watch reminds me that every second is a gift, and it is our duty to use each second to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Today, we stand for these children. We will not let you take this school." The developer's face turned pale for a moment, and he staggered back, shocked by the Prime Minister's unexpected firmness. The crowd behind them started to murmur louder. Parents stepping forward, teachers wiping tears from their faces, and standing straighter, Anjali squeezed between two adults and ran to Sundar, grabbing his hand tightly. "Please don't let them take our school," she whispered again and again, her voice trembling. Sundar bent down, lifting her into his arms. He turned slowly to face the developer and the bulldozers waiting like silent monsters at the gate. His heart pounded like a drum, echoing all the promises he had made to himself and his father. Yes, was the moment, the real test of everything he had learned and believed. Modi ji reached for a microphone that one of his security officers held. He handed it to Sundar with a firm nod. Sundar took it, holding it in one hand, while still holding Anjali close with the other. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him, the children's trust hanging in the air like a fragile flower. He began to speak, his voice soft at first, but growing stronger with each word. He talked about his own childhood, about the cracked watch that taught him the value of time and sacrifice. He told them about his dreams and failures, about how every small act of kindness had carried him forward more than any big success. He looked around at the children's faces, their wide eyes reflecting every word like mirrors. He spoke of the power of dreams, of how each child there was a universe waiting to bloom. He spoke of responsibility, of courage, of standing up even when you felt small and powerless. His words wrapped around them like a protective blanket, making even the parents wipe their eyes and stand taller. The crowd grew larger, neighbors and strangers gathering around, drawn by the power of his voice and the raw emotion pouring out like an unstoppable river. By the time Sundar finished, there was a deep silence that stretched across the street. The developer's face was red with anger, his lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. He signaled his men to start moving, but before they could take a single step, the parents surged forward, forming a human wall at the entrance of the school. Teachers joined them, linking arms, their faces fierce and unyielding. Even the smallest children stepped forward, their tiny hands clutching each other, eyes burning with silent defiance. Modi ji stepped beside Sundar again, his hand resting firmly on Sundar's back. He turned to the developer and spoke with quiet finality. "If you wish to destroy this school, you will have to go through us first. And let me remind you, the soul of a nation cannot be bulldozed." The words fell heavy and final, breaking whatever last grip of power the developer thought he had. He looked around, seeing hundreds of determined faces staring back at him. He knew he had lost, not just the legal battle, but something far deeper, the spirit of the people he had underestimated. With shaking hands, he signaled his men to retreat. The jeeps reversed slowly, the bulldozer turning back with a loud, defeated groan. As they left, the crowd erupted into cheers, parents hugging their children, teachers crying openly. Sundar held Anjali tightly, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck, her tears soaking into his shirt. He looked at Modi ji, who smiled, lifting his wrist to show the old watch once more. In that moment, Sundar felt as if time itself had bowed to them, granting them this tiny but monumental victory. But even as the joy spread like wildfire, Sundar felt a small, cold worry creeping into the edges of his mind. He knew that this was only one battle. The developer would not give up so easily. It would be court cases, threats, and perhaps even darker tactics. He knew the fight had only just begun, but he also knew that they had lit a flame today, a flame that could not be put out by any amount of money or force as the sun rose higher. Bathing the entire scene in golden light, Sundar stood in the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by children who looked at him as if he was a superhero. He felt their hopes press against his heart like tiny stars, each one a promise he had to keep. He glanced at Modi ji, whose eyes held a silent question. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Sundar took a deep breath, tightening his grip around Anjali, and nodded slowly. Just then, a teacher ran toward them, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She clutched a piece of paper in her hand, waving it frantically. Sundar took it from her, reading quickly. His face turned ashen, his hands shaking as he held the paper tighter. The message was clear. A new court order had been issued overnight, allowing immediate demolition of the school, backed by even higher authorities and hidden political deals. The fight was far from over. Sundar looked up slowly, meeting Modi. Geez, gaze. In that silent exchange, they both understood the real war for these children's dreams had only just begun. And in that moment, as the cheers still echoed in the courtyard, Sundar knew that they were stepping into a storm that would demand every ounce of courage, every second of time, and every drop of faith they carried inside them. The courtyard, just moments before, filled with cheers and laughter, fell into a thick silence as Sundar lowered the paper. The children's giggles stopped, teachers froze mid-step, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath, the paper in Sundar's trembling hands felt heavier than any burden he had carried in his entire life. It was as if every dream of the children, every tear of the parents, and every line of chalk on the dusty blackboards weighed down those thin sheets of paper. Sundar felt Anjali's small hand squeeze his, her eyes searching his face for hope, for a promise that he would not let go. Modi ji stepped closer, his calm presence grounding Sundar's spiraling thoughts. He took the paper from Sundar's hands and read it slowly, his eyes narrowing as he reached the final line. His fingers closed around the edge of the page so tightly that they crumpled. He handed it back to Sundar and took a deep breath. In a voice low enough that only Sundar could hear, he said, "They have powerful backers. This is not just about money now. It is a game of politics and power. We must be careful." Sundar nodded slowly, but inside a storm was building. Every second felt like a ticking bomb, and he could feel the old watch in his mind, its hands moving relentlessly forward. Sundar looked around at the children, their wide eyes reflecting both fear and faith. He realized that they were watching him, holding their breath to see what he would do next. If he stepped back now, they would learn to surrender before even trying. If he showed fear, they would learn to accept defeat as their destiny. Sundar felt his spine straighten, his heart beating louder and steadier than ever before. He knelt down to Anjali's level and spoke softly but firmly, "I promised you I would protect this school. I am not going to let them take it away. We will fight and we will win." Anjali's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from fear. She nodded, her small hands curling into fists at her sides. She was no longer just a scared little girl. In that moment she became a symbol of every child in India who had ever been told they were too small to matter. The other children slowly began to gather around, their faces transforming from pale worry to quiet determination. The teachers, emboldened by Sundar's words, stood taller, their shoulders squaring as if they had been given new armor. Modi ji stepped forward, raising his wrist and looking at his old watch again. He seemed to draw strength from it, the same way Sundar did. He turned to the gathered parents and community members, his voice rising above the murmurs. "Today is not the end of this fight. It is the beginning. We must unite, not just as a school or a neighborhood, but as a family. No force is strong enough to break a family that stands together. Let us show them what real India looks like." His words spread through the crowd like a warm wave, igniting small fires in every heart. But Sundar knew they needed more than words now. They needed a plan. He gathered the teachers, parents, and local leaders into a circle under the large banyan tree at the edge of the courtyard. The tree's roots tangled deep into the earth, its wide branches stretching like protective arms over the group. Sundar felt the weight of centuries in that tree, as if it had watched generations rise and fall, and it lent him a calm focus. He laid the crumpled paper on the ground and began speaking quickly but clearly. "They have issued a court order. That means they plan to come back with police and legal backing. They'll try to force us out, maybe even arrest some of us. But we cannot answer violence with violence. We must use our voices, our stories, our unity. We will call the media. Invite journalists. Show the country what is happening here. We will make it impossible for them to act in the shadows." Sundar's words flowed like a river breaking free from a dam. each sentence pulling nods and murmurs of agreement from the circle. One teacher, her eyes red from crying, asked in a trembling voice, "But what if they come tonight? We do not have time." Sundar looked at her and felt a surge of protective energy. "Then we will stay here tonight. We will sleep in these classrooms, on these benches. We will make this place impossible to enter without the world seeing it. I will stay here with you." There was a hush, then a ripple of gasps, and finally, an eruption of clapping and tears. The idea of Sundar Pichai, the world-famous CEO, sleeping on the cold school floor with them, changed something deep inside each person. They no longer felt alone. As the sun began to set, the neighborhood transformed. Mothers arrived with large steel pots filled with rice and sambar. Fathers brought extra blankets and mats, and young people carried old lanterns and battery lights. It became a festival of resistance, a quiet celebration of courage. The children, instead of being scared, laughed, and played under the fading orange sky, as if the night was a giant sleepover rather than a battle for their future. Sundar sat among them, helping Anjali finish her math homework, while Modi ji sat with the elders discussing strategies and gathering old local contacts for support. As darkness spread, the tension rose quietly in the background. The air felt heavy, charged with the unknown. Sundar leaned against a classroom wall, looking up at the stars peeking through the gaps in the clouds. He thought of his father again, imagined him standing there, nodding with pride. He imagined his mother serving food to the children, smiling softly despite her tired eyes. He wondered what they would say if they saw him now, not in a boardroom, not under bright stage lights, but sitting on the dusty ground of an old school, holding a notebook and listening to a little girl recite her science lesson. Just after midnight, a rumble echoed in the narrow street. Headlights cut through the night, bouncing off walls and making the children huddle closer to their parents. Dar stood up slowly, his heart thudding like a distant drum. A convoy of police jeeps pulled up, doors slamming open, boots hitting the ground in a synchronized rhythm that sounded more like a threat than an arrival. An officer with a sharp face and cold eyes stepped forward, his voice echoing sharply, "Everyone must vacate immediately. This is an official order. Resistance will lead to arrest." Modi ji moved forward calmly, holding up both hands. "These are peaceful people. There are children here. There is no need for violence." The officer glanced at Modi ji's face and froze for a moment, recognizing him, his hand hesitating in midair. But then his radio crackled, a voice barking new orders. The officer stiffened, his face hardening again. Sundar moved forward, standing beside Modi ji. He felt Anjali clutching the edge of his shirt, her small body trembling against his leg. The parents and teachers formed a tight circle around the children, their arms locked together, their eyes burning with defiance. The officers stepped forward again, but this time, they met a wall of human strength that did not waver. Sundar stepped forward, his voice clear and firm. "If you want to remove us, you will have to take me first. But remember, the whole world is watching. Every camera, every heart, every child is watching you now." The officers hesitated again, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. In that heavy silence, a few young local journalists began arriving, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. They began recording live streaming to millions across the country. The tension broke like a dam, and suddenly the story was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It became a national moment, a fight for the soul of the country. Exploded, hashtags flooding timelines, people from every corner of India demanding justice for the children in their school. The officer looked around, the realization sinking in. He turned to his men and nodded curtly, signaling them to lower their batons. Sundar felt an overwhelming rush of relief, his knees almost giving way under him. Anjali burst into tears, hugging him tightly as the teachers and parents began to cheer, though cautiously, knowing the fight wasn't over yet. Modi ji moved through the crowd, his face a mixture of relief and steady focus, reminding everyone to stay calm and peaceful. As dawn crept up slowly, painting the sky with pink and golden lines, the courtyard turned into a living portrait of quiet victory and exhausted hope. Families sat together on mats, sharing tea and biscuits. Children slept curled in their mothers' laps, and young volunteers roamed around distributing water and blankets. Sundar sat on a small wooden bench, Anjali still sleeping against his shoulder, her tiny hand wrapped around his wrist as if anchoring him to this moment forever. He looked across the courtyard and saw Modi Ji standing near the gate, his back straight, his head lifted as if he was greeting the new sun. Sundar felt a wave of deep respect, realizing that beyond politics and positions, this was a man who had chosen to stand beside the weakest, who had chosen to use his time not for power, but for protection. Sundar touched Anjali's head gently, feeling her slow, steady breathing against his side. In that quiet moment, he understood that sometimes the greatest victories were not announced in headlines or celebrated on stages. Sometimes they happened in dusty courtyards under a rising sun, in the silent promise of a child's trust. But even as the first rays of sunlight warmed his face, Sundar's phone buzzed again. He picked it up slowly, already bracing himself for what might come next. The message on the screen made his heart sink like a stone. Developers planning a final push. They have hired private security forces. They will come tonight with full force. Prepare. Sundar felt the blood drain from his face. He looked around at the sleeping children, the resting parents, the brave teachers who had spent all their strength. He knew the coming night would not be like before. This time, it would be a true storm, one that could shatter everything they had built. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath, feeling Anjali's warmth, and hearing the faint creak of the old watch in his memory. He opened his eyes, his expression sharpening with a new fire. He knew what he had to do. They had held back the tide once, but now they would need more than words and peaceful resistance. They would need every ounce of courage, every hidden reserve of strength. They would need to be unbreakable. And as the sky turned brighter, Sundar looked at Modi Ji across the courtyard, their eyes locking in silent understanding. They both nodded, a small, almost invisible gesture, but one that carried the weight of 1,000 promises. Tonight would decide everything. The entire day felt like it was wrapped in an invisible fog. Even as the sun climbed higher, there was no warmth in the air, only an uneasy stillness that wrapped around every heart in the school courtyard. Families who had spent the night huddled together began to clean up, folding blankets and wiping tears from children's cheeks, trying to act normal, though a silent fear clung to their movements. The elders whispered in small circles. Teachers checked on their students again and again, and young volunteers kept watch at the gate, as if they could already hear the footsteps of an approaching army. Sundar moved quietly through the courtyard, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but burning with determination. Every few steps he would stop to speak softly with a parent or kneel beside a child, patting their head and offering gentle reassurances. Anjali never left his side. She followed him everywhere, holding tightly to his hand as though it was a lifeline she could not afford to lose. Her small eyes studied every line on his face, her childish mind sensing that today was not just another day. Something much larger and darker was coming for them. Modi Ji stood under the big banyan tree again, talking quietly with local community leaders and teachers. Even from a distance, Sundar could see the way his shoulders were set, the quiet authority in his posture. Modi Ji's old watch peeked out from under his sleeve, catching the sunlight every now and then like a quiet heartbeat ticking through the day. Each time Sundar saw it, he felt a wave of strength roll through his chest, as if that small, scratched watch was whispering to him that they still had time, that every second mattered, that they must not give up. By mid-afternoon, journalists began to arrive in greater numbers. Large news vans parked along the narrow street, cameras were set up.
Ow.
Reporters hurried around with notepads and microphones, searching for the right angle to capture the story that had gripped the entire nation overnight. Social media had exploded. Hashtags demanding justice for the school were trending everywhere, and millions of people shared photos of the children sitting bravely beside their parents. The story had grown beyond the neighborhood, beyond Chennai, beyond India. It had become a symbol, a raw reminder that progress without compassion was nothing but destruction, dressed in new clothes. Sundar, dude. Wisely, he stepped up onto a low wall, holding Anjali's hand, and called out to the crowd. The reporters turned their cameras to him immediately, their microphones pushing closer. Sundar took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice echoing across the courtyard and through the streets beyond. He talked about how he had once been a child in this very neighborhood, running barefoot to school, dreaming of a world far bigger than the dusty lanes around him. He shared stories of his friends who had dropped out, of teachers who had given up their salaries to keep classrooms open, of his mother who had given him her own meal so he could study without hunger gnawing at his belly. As he spoke, Sundar's voice grew stronger, steadier, filled with a quiet fire that made even the reporters forget to blink. He reminded everyone that education was not a privilege, but a right, that each child carried the future of the nation in their eyes. He told them that if they allowed this school to fall, they would be tearing a hole in the heart of India itself. He looked down at Anjali and lifted her up so the entire crowd could see her small, determined face. "This is not just Anjali's fight," he said, his voice trembling. "This is our fight. If we stand together today, we can protect the dreams of millions like her." Tears rolled down Anjali's cheeks, but she did not look away. She stared straight into the cameras, her little hand clenched in a fist. In that moment, she became more than just a child. She became a warrior, a symbol of every child's unspoken strength. The crowd erupted in loud cheers and chants, parents raising their arms, teachers crying openly, young volunteers shouting slogans. The energy in the courtyard shifted, turning from fear to fiery resolve. As dusk fell, a quiet dread began to settle again. The earlier message about the private security forces returning tonight felt like a heavy cloud pressing on every chest. Families began to build small barricades at the gate, stacking benches and chairs, even desks and old boards. Teachers organized small watch groups. Volunteers prepared first aid kits, and older students carried buckets of water, knowing they might need them if things turned violent. Sundar moved among them, guiding hands, steadying voices, and stopping every few minutes to reassure the children that they would be safe. Modi ji stood close to Sundar as the last light of the day disappeared behind the rooftops. They exchanged a long, silent look, two men from different worlds, united by a single mission. Modi ji finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "We must be ready for the worst. I will stand with you, but if they come with force, it will not be easy to protect everyone." Sundar nodded, his jaw tightening. "We knew this would not be easy. But if we run now, these children will learn that their dreams can be taken by anyone stronger. We cannot let that lesson become their truth." As darkness spread, the street outside the gate remained eerily silent. Every sound felt amplified. The rustle of a plastic bag in the wind, the distant bark of a dog, the quiet breathing of children curled up on mats. Sundar sat with Anjali, telling her stories of stars and planets, of faraway galaxies where children never had to fight for their schools. She listened with wide eyes, her head resting on his lap, slowly drifting into sleep as the night deepened. Just past midnight, a low rumble began at the end of the street. Headlights appeared like angry eyes cutting through the shadows. Sundar's heart skipped a beat. The private security forces had arrived. Black jeeps and trucks rolled slowly forward, stopping just short of the barricade. Men in dark uniforms stepped out, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes cold and unfeeling. They carried batons, shields, and heavy flashlights that they shone across the courtyard like searchlights looking for prey. Sundar stood up, gently shifting Anjali into a teacher's arms. He stepped forward toward the barricade, joined immediately by Modi ji and several teachers and parents. They formed a line, standing shoulder to shoulder, their shadows tall and trembling behind them. The head of the security force stepped forward, his voice echoing harshly in the tense night. "Disperse immediately. This is private property now. You are trespassing. We will use force if necessary." Now his words sliced through the courtyard like icy wind, but no one moved. Modi ji stepped forward, raising his hands high. His voice, though calm, carried a sharp edge. "There are children here. We will not allow you to harm them. Step back now," the commander sneered, shaking his head. He raised his hand, and the security officers began to move forward slowly, deliberately, their boots pounding against the pavement like a war drum. Sundar felt his knees tremble, but he forced himself to stay still, breathing deeply, every muscle in his body screaming to protect those behind him. The children, though frightened, did not scream. They held each other tightly, their small bodies pressed together, eyes wide and wet, but filled with an unspoken courage. Teachers and parents formed a second line behind Sundar and Modi ji, gripping each other's hands, bracing themselves for the impact. Cameras flashed as the journalists captured every second. Live streams carried the scene into millions of homes across India and beyond. The country watched, breath held tight, hearts pounding along with every footstep echoing in that narrow street. The officers reached the barricade and began to push against it, metal and wood groaning under their weight. Sundar felt a surge of heat rush through his body. He pushed back using all his strength, feeling hands grab his arms to support him from behind. Modi ji beside him, his face set like stone, pushed with equal force. For a few seconds, time seemed to freeze every heartbeat, every strained breath stretched into an eternity. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed as a part of the barricade gave way. Officers started to spill inside, shoving and shouting. Sundar turned quickly, pushing back a teacher who nearly fell, grabbing another who slipped on the ground. I saw Anjali, still in the arms of a teacher, her eyes wide in terror. Rage unlike anything he had ever known erupted inside him. He turned back, meeting the eyes of an advancing officer, and stepped forward boldly, shouting, "Stop! Look at these children. What kind of men are you if you attack them? Where is your humanity?" The officer hesitated, his baton frozen in mid-air. A moment of trembling silence fell. The cameras caught every second, beaming Sundar's words into homes across the world. One by one, officers began to lower their batons. Confusion rippled through their line. They looked at each other, some taking small steps back. The commander roared angrily, waving for them to keep pushing. But the hesitation had already begun to spread like a crack in a wall. Suddenly, a parent in the back started singing a soft song, an old lullaby that mothers used to sing to their children in this neighborhood. Others joined, their voices trembling at first, then growing stronger. The song floated into the night. Air, weaving through the barricade, wrapping around the children, the parents, even the security officers. Some of them paused, blinking, their eyes softening behind their masks. One officer dropped his baton completely, stepping backward, shaking his head. Another turned and began to walk away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The commander screamed again, but it was too late. The line of officers began to fall apart, like sand slipping through fingers. Some dropped to their knees, others simply walked away, heads bowed. The journalists captured every second, the entire country witnessing a moment of pure, raw humanity, overpowering force and greed. Sundar felt tears pouring down his face, his chest heaving with relief and exhaustion. He turned to look at Anjali, who was now standing on her own, her small face lit with an expression of wonder and strength. She took a few steps forward, looked up at Sundar, and whispered, "You didn't let them take our school." Sundar dropped to his knees, opening his arms wide. She ran to him, burying her face in his chest as he hugged her tightly, his tears soaking into her hair as the first hints of dawn began to break. Painting the sky in soft pink and lavender, the remaining officers disappeared into the night. The courtyard filled with cries of joy and relief, parents holding their children, closed teachers collapsing onto the ground, overcome by emotion. Sundar and Modi ji stood together, their arms around each other's shoulders, their faces streaked with tears but glowing with victory. But deep inside, Sundar knew this was only a temporary reprieve. They had won the night, but there would be legal battles, new tactics, and even more difficult days ahead. Yet, in that moment, surrounded by the purest love and courage he had ever known, he felt stronger than ever. He realized that as long as people stood together, as long as there was one child willing to dream, they could never truly lose. And as the sun rose higher, lighting up the old school building, Sundar felt the ticking of an unseen watch echo in his heart, reminding him that every second was a chance to fight, to protect, to love. And he vowed to use every second to keep that promise alive. But even as the sun bathed them in golden light, a new message arrived on Sundar's phone. One that would set the stage for the final battle. A decision that would change not just the school's future, but the destiny of the entire nation. The courtyard, still echoing with the songs of victory, was bathed in the soft glow of the new morning sun. Parents sat in small groups, holding their children tightly, as if they feared they might disappear if they let go. Teachers leaned against cracked walls, eyes closed, finally allowing themselves a few moments of rest after an endless night of fear and resistance. Anjali sat beside Sundar on a low step, her head resting against his arm, her small fingers drawing invisible patterns. On the dusty ground, she looked up at him every few seconds, her eyes filled with a kind of wonder that only children carry, the belief that even the impossible can be made real. Sundar stared at the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun spread slowly across his face. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to breathe fully, to let the exhaustion wash over him. Beside him, Modiji stood with his eyes closed, his face turned toward the light. The old watch on his wrist glinted softly, scratches on its surface now looking like battle scars that had stories of their own. Sundar found himself thinking about his father again, the countless evenings spent waiting for the bus, the silent lessons on patience and dignity. He felt as if his father was standing somewhere nearby, unseen but deeply present, nodding in approval. But then, the quiet was shattered. Sundar's phone buzzed sharply, vibrating against his leg like a wasp trapped under glass. He looked down. Slowly, a cold dread creeping up his spine. The message on the screen was short, but carried the weight of 1,000 storms. Supreme Court hearing advanced to today, final decision in hours. School fate to be decided permanently. Sundar felt as though the air had been punched out of his chest. He read the message again and again, each time feeling the words clawed deeper into his heart. He looked up at Modiji, their eyes meeting instantly. Without a word, Modiji took a step forward, placing a strong hand on Sundar's shoulder. The meaning was clear. They had to act, and they had to act now. Modiji gathered the local leaders and teachers under the banyan tree. Sundar watched as they discussed the urgent plan in hushed but intense voices. The parents and children began to sense the tension in the air again, their shoulders stiffening, their eyes darting from face to face. Anjali looked up at Sundar with wide, searching eyes. He bent down, his voice gentle but firm. "Golly, do you trust me?" She nodded without hesitation, her small fingers tightening around his. He smiled, though it felt heavy, and whispered, "I will not let anyone take your dreams away. Not today, not ever." With the plan agreed upon, Sundar and Modiji prepared to leave for the court. As they walked toward the waiting cars, a line of children formed along the gate. Each child raised their hand high, as if saluting the two men who had become their unexpected heroes. Sundar paused at the gate, turning to face them all. He raised his own hand, his heart swelling with so much emotion that he thought it might burst. Modiji stepped beside him, lifting his wrist to show the old watch once again, a silent promise that they would return. No matter what the court decided, the ride to the Supreme Court was tense and silent, every second stretching into an eternity. Sundar stared out the window, the city speeding past in a blur of colors and shapes. He thought of his own journey from the narrow lanes of Chennai to the gleaming towers of Silicon Valley, from quiet boyhood dreams to global stages. But none of that felt as important as this moment. He felt stripped bare, no longer a CEO, or a symbol, but just a son, a friend, a protector standing for those who could not stand alone. As they approached the grand steps of the Supreme Court, crowds had already gathered. Journalists shoved microphones toward them, cameras flashed like lightning, people shouted questions that flew past Sundar's ears like buzzing insects. He kept walking, his face set, his eyes locked on the massive doors ahead. Beside him, Modiji moved with a steady calm that seemed to flow into Sundar, strengthening his resolve with every step. The two men entered the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors closing behind them with a deep, echoing thud that felt like the closing of a chapter inside. The courtroom was cold and imposing, the air thick with anticipation. The judges sat high. Above, their eyes sharp and unreadable. Lawyers for the developers stood at one side, their suits perfect, their faces smug and certain. Sundar felt his stomach twist, but he kept his head high. He turned to Modi Ji, who gave him a single, quiet nod. It was time. As Sundar stepped forward to speak, the room seemed to shrink around him. Every face, every breath, every heartbeat felt impossibly close. He began to speak slowly, his voice low but unwavering. He shared stories of the children of Anjali and her dream to become a scientist, of the boy who wanted to teach, of the girl who sang songs to her sick mother at night. He spoke of the teachers who had given up their own comfort to keep the school alive, of the parents who had chosen hope over despair again and again. As he spoke, he felt each word root itself into the cold marble floors, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the stories and holding them tight. He then talked about the watch, not just Modi Ji's watch, but also his father's, and what it meant. He told them that time was the most precious resource they had, and every second stolen from these children was a crime against the future. He spoke with a trembling but powerful honesty, each sentence striking like a quiet bell in a dark hall. Slowly, he felt the energy in the room change. The lawyers on the opposing side began to shift uncomfortably, their papers suddenly feeling heavier, their confident smiles slipping away. Modi Ji stepped forward next. His voice was like a steady river, carrying years of wisdom and quiet strength. He reminded the court that India had always been built on dreams and sacrifices, not on concrete and profit margins. He spoke of his own humble beginnings, the countless families he had met who carried their lives on their shoulders but never let go of hope. He raised his wrist one last time, showing the old watch. "This watch is a reminder," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "A reminder that every second matters. Every child matters. If we fail them today, we fail India itself." A heavy silence fell across the courtroom. The chief judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable, his fingers steepled under his chin. Minutes felt like centuries as they waited. Finally, the judge began to speak, his voice deep and echoing through the massive hall. He talked about laws and property rights, about economic development, but then his tone shifted. He acknowledged the power of education, the importance of protecting dreams, the soul of the nation that lay hidden in small classrooms like that. School. He paused, looked directly at Sundar and Modi Ji, and then delivered the words that seemed to freeze the world in place. The court rules in favor of the school. All demolition orders are permanently revoked. The land is to remain dedicated to education forever. For a moment, there was only silence, a deep, trembling silence that hung in the air like a held breath. Then, it broke a flood of tears, gasps, and cries of joy. Sundar felt his legs give out, and he sank to his knees right there in the courtroom, his hands covering his face as sobs racked his body. Modi Ji dropped beside him, pulling him into an embrace that was as strong as it was gentle. Around them, people erupted into applause. Reporters cried openly, and the entire country seemed to exhale at once. When Sundar finally looked up, his vision blurred with tears. He saw flashes from cameras capturing the moment forever. He knew that somewhere back at the school, Anjali was probably jumping and shouting, her little heart soaring higher than any building ever could. He imagined the parents hugging each other, teachers collapsing with relief, children running through the courtyard with unstoppable laughter spilling from their lips. In that single moment, all the pain, all the fear, all the exhaustion transformed into something radiant, a pure, unbreakable joy. Outside the court, as they stepped into the blinding afternoon light, crowds rushed forward, their cheers rolling like thunder across the steps. People threw flower petals, chanted their names, and reached out to touch their hands, as if hoping to catch a piece of their strength. Sundar raised both hands high, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. He felt an energy surge through him, stronger than any boardroom applause, brighter than any award stage spotlight. This was real. This was alive. This was India, beating in every hand, every voice, every tear. When they finally returned to the school later that day, they were met by a wave of children who ran forward, arms outstretched, their voices rising into a chaotic, joyful symphony. Anjali reached Sundar first, throwing herself into his arms so hard that he stumbled back, laughing through tears. She looked up at him, her face glowing, and whispered, "I knew you would save us." Sundar kissed her forehead, holding her close as the teachers and parents swarmed around, their faces bright with an exhaustion that had turned into pure happiness. Modi Ji stood by the gate, his eyes scanning the crowd, his old watch catching the last rays of the sun, as if it were winking at the sky. He looked at Sundar, their eyes meeting one final time in a long, silent conversation. They both knew this. It was not the end, but a new beginning. They had planted a seed today that would grow in every child's heart, reminding them that no dream was too small, no voice too quiet, no heart too weak to change the world. That evening, as the sun sank behind, the rooftops in the sky turned a soft violet. Sundar sat on the steps of the school, Anjali sleeping beside him, her head resting in his lap. He looked around at the courtyard, now filled with soft lights, laughter, and music. Parents shared plates of food, teachers sang old songs, and children ran through the open gates like they were running into an endless tomorrow. Sundar felt a warmth spread through his chest, a steady glowing warmth that seemed to fill every empty space he had ever carried inside him. He touched his bare wrist gently, closing his eyes as he imagined his father's watch ticking away every second, a soft echo in his soul. He promised silently to himself that he would never forget this moment, that he would carry it into every meeting, every speech, every decision. He would remind the world again and again that progress was not measured in profits, but in the smiles of children, in the quiet strength of teachers, in the dreams carried by small hands gripping pencils tighter than any weapon. And as the stars appeared one by one above them, Sundar looked up at the endless night sky, a soft smile playing at the edges of his lips. He felt his father's spirit beside him, felt every heartbeat of the children vibrating through the earth beneath his feet, felt the silent promise of a nation reborn in kindness and courage. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new storms too, weather. But tonight, in this courtyard filled with light and love, he had won something far greater than any title or company. He had won back the soul of a nation, one small heart at a time.